What you're about to hear is a conversation with Gabe from Helmgast about running Kult Divinity Lost. We invited him to share his experience and perspective as a game designer and GM, and to talk through how the game works at the table. This discussion assumes that you, the listener or viewer, have at least some prior experience with GMing role-playing games. We are not presenting this as a step-by-step tutorial or a classroom-style teaching session. Instead, this is a practical, conversational deep dive into mechanics, intent, and how GM and player moves function in actual play. Now, with that in mind, let's get into the conversation. Hello, and welcome to the Illusion Horror and Con YouTube channel. And for this series that we're doing right now, we are talking to Gabe the Herald from Helmgast about Kult Divinity Lost and how to game master this game. And thank you, Gabe, for joining us. And I'm Crystal. I'm 1/3 of the Illusion Horror and Con admin team. And I'm joined here with David. You can introduce yourself if you like.
Hello, I'm also 1/3 of the Illusion Horror and Con. And I think Crystal and I have been both fascinated by Kult for a while now. And it's been on our mind to kind of share the interesting aspects of running this game properly. And thank you again, Gabe, for joining us and maybe giving us some insight from the official source of Kult Divinity Lost. Gabe, do you want to give us your introduction, who you are, what do you do, and why it's so clever to have you on the board to talk to you?
Why should we listen to you?
Yes.
Hello, everyone. Hello, Crystal and David. I am Gabe the Herald. I've been working with Peter, the creative director of Kult Divinity Lost, and then for Helmgast for 4 years now. And I help him with writing and game design and pretty much anything else you can think of. And I am here today to share my way of GMing. I've been helping, let's say, GMs in the Discord servers for some time now. And I guess we just decided to do this here. Mm-hmm. It seems like a good idea to have the central series to share. Makes
we'll
it
have
easier.
The source of truth right here.
But I do wanted to say that I will share how I GM Kult, and this will be Kult specific. Although I feel like a lot of it can be used elsewhere. But this is how I do it. We will be talking about the rules as they are written in the core rules, the core book. And
cool.
Excellent. Yeah.
Just a reminder maybe for the audience, previous to that episode we sent out a form and a questionnaire for any questions that you might have regarding the topic for this opening panel, basically. We will do the same for the upcoming other panels as well, so make sure that to watch out for our announcements, and if you have any questions for the next part of the series, to submit your questions in time before, so we can look through them and incorporate them in the series itself.
Yes, please let us know what you think, what your questions are, what you're confused about. That's what this whole series is about, and we appreciate your feedback. So, shall we get started with this first part, where we just talk about Kult Divinity Lost in general. And Gabe, I think, one of our first questions is talking about the uniqueness of Kult Divinity Lost as a TTRPG game. what sets it apart from most other games that people play. Maybe more specifically, what sets it apart from potentially other Powered by the Apocalypse games.
Okay. This is a thorny topic. Kult is a different kind of Powered by the Apocalypse game, in the sense that it tries to merge a lot of traditional gaming and Powered by the Apocalypse philosophy. So you will have player moves, GM moves, you will have the degrees of success, so full success, success with complications and failure. But you will also have some elements of traditional play. But mostly, I feel like what strikes us most different to people would be the lack of initiative for combat, or more robust rules, like using distances and maps and speed while the character runs and climbs. Specific abilities such as climbing or athletics. These are all condensed into moves, like player moves. And one key thing would be that the GM doesn't roll. Not that you can't as a GM, but it's not the idea. It's not how it's not as it's written. And yeah, I think rules wise, that would be it. Narratively, I do feel that the GM holds more power over the story compared to the typical Powered by the Apocalypse game. But that depends on GMing style. I myself, I like to give a lot of freedom and agency to the players to decide stuff about the setting. But that might not be the case for everyone. And yeah, I wonder, how do you see Kult? If you agree with me on this.
Mm-hmm. Yes. So what initially drew me to Kult Divinity Lost was the fact that it was so different than the typical games that I had started out playing, Dungeons and Dragons, Call of Cthulhu. I really enjoy that it is so narrative, and the way that I GM is very much, I use the player moves as a suggestion and not really have to roll. Honestly, most of the games that I GM, I only call for rolls maybe a couple times in a session, because I agree with you. I like to give my players a lot of freedom to do what they want to do what that they think their characters are going to do, and I'll add in some rolls to, keep it spicy. But honestly, most of the time when I play with people who really enjoy Kult Divinity Lost and understand the game, I don't really need to add spiciness through rolls. They are just going to do that through their characters and how they play their characters. I get that a lot. I really only introduce rolls to people who maybe are having some trouble getting out of a mindset of Dungeons and Dragons or Call of Cthulhu.
Yeah, from my perspective, actually, I was a bit careful and cautious when I first saw Kult Divinity Lost, and we both played it in a game previously to kind of get an idea about it. Unfortunately, the GM was not really our style, so I already kind of had a bit of mistrust. But then I began to kind of dig into, and Crystal was running kind of her first games and was reading the rules, I was initially kind of very confused, I guess is the right word, because the GM does nothing. It is all, a few moves. They are hard and soft moves as a GM, and then the list kind of expanded and advantages, disadvantages. And it was a bit overwhelming at the beginning, but then once I actually get started and I had a story in mind, or I think, yeah, I actually played a story or made directly my own first cult story. The main point was that I realized how much more player focused Kult Divinity Lost is than any other games that I had. And it was, for me, the moment of, oh, right, okay, this is exactly what I want to do. In narrative role playing, focus on the players' initiative, on their initiative in a sense of like what they want to do, they can do, and there will be consequences to actions when they come to it. For me as a GM, it actually is becoming less complicated because I don't have to roll, I don't have to look at tables and this and that. It is much more streamlined, and the overall, obviously, ambience, theme, and story, the setting of Cult is just, I mean, if you've read or seen Clive Barker stuff, I mean, how can you not like this? And yeah, but like specifically for me, the uniqueness about Cult is, I think, compared to any most popular role playing game out there, it is a heavy focus on the players, their decisions, their kind of development throughout the gaming. And yeah, sometimes I have like 2 roles in 4 hours of gaming because like I don't need to do anything because the players are already doing pretty much everything. I just drop in kind of settings, themes, and tropes maybe. But yeah, it is a very different but also very GM. It's a hard learning curve, let's put it this way, but it's worth learning in my perspective. It is a very interesting step to come to.
We have this conversation about the learning curve every now and then in the Elysium fan Discord server. And the general consensus is that when the GM or player just got into role-playing, they have a super, like, easy, like, smooth learning curve.
Yeah.
But if you're playing for some time and you're used to some traditional concepts like grids and the GM roles and some games, I think it's changed, now. But some games will focus on GM versus players. And detaching yourself from that is the difficult part. Because narratively, like fiction-wise, it's difficult to miss when everything you do is right, So you don't have initiative because you can just look at what's happening and say, it makes sense that Crystal would act first here. And let the dice fall and see what happens. So that's my one disagreement. What I do like about Kult is that what makes it shine for me specifically is that it's usually, or at least I feel like it should be, stories about like really broken people with difficult relationships and difficult choices, and the horror comes from the consequences of dealing with those things. But that's for another moment. We actually plan to begin with the very basics of the system and progress from there. And this is my warning for GMs. When I speak of the system and when I speak of GMing, I am speaking to people that have groups that want to engage with the horror and want to engage with the consequences and the brokenness of their characters and how difficult things might be. And we're not going to talk about group dynamics or selling the point of playing Kult to your players. I feel like it's widely understood by now that Kult and any game whatsoever will be for everyone, but Kult most specifically because of the themes. So not every story will be for every GM and every player, but I assume everyone at your table is acting, with open-mindedness, and will come to you with an open heart, and will follow the horror contract and want to see those kinds of stories. But that's it from my prerequisite of GMs listening to this. I'll try to keep everything spoiler free, so I'm not gonna talk about the powers that be and reveal any major secrets that the players wouldn't already know by playing one session of Kult. So if my fellow GM, wants to send this to a player and give them this as teaching material, you could do that. I hope you can do that. And yeah.
Okay.
Should we begin?
I do want to have a little bit of a caveat of no spoilers. I think we are going to discuss sort of the topical lore of Kult, just so that we can get into some of the player moves, and specifically see through the illusion. We do kind of have to talk a little bit about the lore, but we'll try to do it as topically and non-spoilery as possible.
The bare basics, and I feel like this is the most important aspect of understanding how to GM Kult, is to see the game, the actual session, as a conversation. It feels super basic to say this, but I need GMs to get used to the idea of moves. And what it means that everything you say as a GM is a move, is an entry to the conversation, and you are either opening up space for something to be explored, or you are delivering a threat or acting on a threat, warning, or you're offering an opportunity for something else to happen. Everything you do as a GM, everything, even the basic, it is raining today and you're locked into your apartment. This is setting the scene. This is, establishing the possible threat of not leaving your apartment. So even the bare basics of it is a move. You don't have to be super locked up in this idea of making moves, but you do have to understand there's an exchange there. So you do something and the players respond. And when they respond, it could be that they have to roll dice, but it might not be the case. But even the basic things of asking you, okay, is it raining, but is it acid rain? This is a move. They are establishing the story with you, and there's the exchange. And following from that, we have GM moves. That is a list of specific things you do as a GM. And I want to emphasize that everything you do falls into one of the moves, the GM moves. But not everything that the player does will trigger a player move or disadvantage or whatever other move that we have. So that's the very, very basics. Crystal and David, do you have anything to add here?
So the GM moves, I might say that they are categories of suggestions. Would that be an accurate way to describe them?
Yeah, it's more like guidance.
Guidelines.
You cannot really do anything outside of them because everything's described within the guidance.
Yeah. Okay.
But it helps to look at the name of GM moves and see where you're going. So the one of the GM moves would be deal damage. You don't have to say, oh, I have to do a GM move, I'm gonna deal damage. You don't do that, but that's a GM move. Same would be offering an opportunity with or without price, or announcing an off-screen problem or a future problem. Everything's a GM move. But knowing them, you don't have to know them by heart or keep them next to your screen or stare at them during the session. But it helps to look at them and get familiarized with the concept. But everything's a GM move, essentially.
Yeah. And maybe to put that practically into setting up for your games, if you have a pre-written scenario or you're doing your own scenario, you have situations that you're going to introduce to your players. And if it might be easier for you to have some specific player or specific GM moves to dole out when the time arises, because we'll get into the specific player moves, but a lot of what they're going to be rolling is success with complications. So it might be helpful to write some complications, which is just the complications are the GM moves, right? So having a list at your disposal, just to quickly look at it and then put it into the narrative might be helpful.
I might want to add something because you defined it so nicely as a conversation that the GM and the players have. I think one of the still uniqueness of Kult is also like there's no such thing as winning the game. There's no such thing as kind of encountering the monstrous evil and then defeating it. It is, as you described earlier, the consequences of the character's actions after that. It is the growth of the characters that they have throughout the experience. So as a GM, if you have these lists of GM suggestions, moves, always think about what is more interesting for the story, because ultimately it is a collaborative storytelling that you all kind of experience, and you don't want to kind of just like batter down on the players because you have to use the moves or you have to do this and this. Think about what is the story that you want to tell, because this is about, in a sense, self-exploration of the characters. They want to see how they deal with the trauma and the dark secrets that they will face maybe in your actions, in your scenes. So as Gabe said, GM moves are suggestions, but also think about what is the story that you want to tell and go from that perspective of, do you want them to be badly hurt just before the end and then go into a big fight, or should they be completely normal and then see kind of the chaos intrude upon them and slowly but surely kind of wither under the loss of mental capacity? I think that's something that I would highlight here as well, because Kult is not a game about winning, it's about storytelling. What is more interesting.
If anything, there's a GM principle that says you should be a fan of the player characters, and you should be a fan of their story, and you should be GMing to see their stories, at the brightest, at the lowest, at the highest. You should strive to give them the spotlight and love them and hate them and feel with them So yeah, not playing to win is a good one. And it's a principle that a lot of people seem to miss. But we'll get a bit... I'll try to explain GM moves maybe a bit later in a way that makes sense for me, but I will frame them a bit differently in the context of running scenes. But I wanted to first talk a bit about the player moves. So when does a player roll? Because if you do a GM move and the player answers in a way that makes sense that they would roll, and you want them to roll, then they do. But when they roll, differs based on moves that they have access to and general feel. I feel like most of the time you should be trying to negotiate success and complications, and most GMs will be surprised that their tables, that their players will want to negotiate instead of rolling, because everyone buys into the idea of horror. So, as an example, the player says that they shoot a creature, and you, as a GM, might feel the impulse to have them roll to engage in combat. But as a GM move, you might offer the opportunity with a price. So you hit the creature, but the creature strikes back. That's one move, So as a GM, this may happen, but we need to talk about rolls.
Yeah.
So players have access to a bunch of player moves, and these are the basic moves tied to the attributes that everyone knows. So influence other, avoid harm, keep it together, see through the illusion. These are called like basic player moves. And the other player moves are advantages and disadvantages. We also have relation moves, but these are for later.
Yeah.
So what is a move? A move has a title that says what the move does. So engage in combat tells you explicitly that the player is engaging an able opponent, someone that is willing to strike back. And every move has a trigger. And for engage in combat, it is when you engage an able opponent in combat, explain how, and roll plus violence. And the attribute you roll. Every move also has 3 degrees of success. So if the player rolls 15 or more, it is a full success. So the player character does exactly as the player described. You might give, some GMs coming from traditional settings like games might want to flourish things a bit more. So the player rolls 2d10 and gets 2 10s. And that feels like a natural 20 if you were rolling a d20. And some GMs want to give more, but you're not obligated to do that. Critical success and critical failure doesn't exist in Kult rolls as written. But by all means, if you want it to be like this, you can do it. But anyways, 15 or more, it's a full success. For example, in engage in combat, the player character will inflict damage and avoid counterattacks. There is success with complications, which is any number between 10 and 14, so 10, 11, 12. And success with complications is the player does what they strived to do, but something happens. Usually a complication, that's the name, that's in the name, success with a complication, but you might do something different depending on your need at the moment. The player moves associated with the attributes, they have the GM options sometimes already described, but these are also in a way, described in the GM moves guidance. So, for example, engage in combat, one of the options for the success with a complication is you're subjected to a counterattack. This is just deal damage, the GM move deal damage, written in a different way. One other option would be you'll be in trouble later on. This is another GM move written in a different way. This could be announce off-screen problems, so you move away from the action at that moment and describe what's happening elsewhere. It could be announce future problems, in that you warn the player and the player character of what might happen in the future. It could be something that happens in the moment. For example, you'll be in trouble later on might be that the creature stabs the character and the character is bleeding. And there's this understanding that if you're bleeding, the creature will find you easily later. So you stun the creature, but she counterattacks. And now you're running, bleeding, and you might have trouble later on. So every option described in the player moves and advantages is a kind of is the GM move rewritten, rephrased for ease of reference and ease of improvisation. And then there's failure, and that's 9 or less, which can be summarized in you as a GM do a hard move. You make a hard move. And we'll explain soft and GM moves later. But for success with complications, you'll be mostly doing softer GM moves. And for failures, it'll be harder GM moves.
You want to go first?
Well, I think since we also got a couple of questions regarding kind of player moves and how to anticipate them, one particular, for example, was the investigate role. Because some players or some GMs might come from investigatory heavy games, when it comes to Kult, that might be a bit different, because then the question often comes, let's say we have a group of characters who've just come pretty quickly from a dramatic situation. They need to find some information quickly. They entered a room and they're all there. They kind of made it out, but they are under time pressure. How would you, Gabe, now do a investigate role, or if at all, in that situation? Because that's the most likely situation. Let's say they need to find a phone number or an address that is somewhere in this room.
Good. So the investigate move, it reads like this. When you investigate something, you roll plus reason, and on a success, you uncover all direct leads and may ask questions to get additional information. On a success, you get the direct leads and 2 of the questions that are listed under the move. On a success with complications, you do get all direct leads and you may ask 1 question, but the GM does a move, the GM makes a move. There are some options that is written in the move, so the information comes at a cost, determined, sorry, native speaking English people, such as requiring someone or something for the answer, exposing yourself to danger, or needing to expend extra time or resources. Will you do what it takes? So it implies that, or makes it rather explicit, that you have to do something to get the information, like something more. And there's 2 ways to handle that. And failure, you may get some information, but it's up to the GM, and you don't ask one of the additional questions. And anyways, there's 2 ways to handle and investigate. One is zoomed in, In this case, you describe what's happening in the scene action by action. And so I scavenged the room for clues. And I want to know, and that's the key part that the player should make clear. And if the player does not make clear, the GM is in charge to ask. And I scavenge, I rummage through the room to find clues that will lead me to the killer. And this is, if I roll a success, I will find this clue. I will find something that will get me to another location where the killer might be, or an information that gives me like one additional piece of the puzzle. But it's in the scene. And a complication here might be that I spend too much time, and the GM says, you will be here overnight. Pulling the rug and seeing under the mattress and pulling out every painting from the wall to see if you find a safe. And you'll be here for hours and hours and hours. You have to stay awake. And it might be that you lose one stability. Do you want to do this? That's the negotiation. And if the player says yes, then you take away one stability point. And you deliver the information. Oh, so you find that the killer is David. And you realize that because there's a message in the cell phone. So there's one way. The other way that you can handle investigate is to zoom out, and I won't say roleplay, but you cover a lot of ground in the move. So you zoom out and you tell the player, so you look through the room and then you take something back home, and imagine that if it's the 90s, you find the negatives of a photo. And then you have to go back to your office and reveal the photos, and it will take some days. And so the investigator covers the room, going back to the office, waiting, looking through the photos, finding what you need to find, and it might be an entire week of work. But it's the same idea. You'll roll once, you roll reason, and you're trying to look information about the killer, trying to find information about the killer, and it might just be that you will lose some nights of sleep and maybe roll to keep it together, or maybe lose stability because the photographs will be very graphic, or maybe you'll be, if we're zooming out, so we're taking out, maybe we narrate that the character is found by the janitor of the building and she's invaded a crime scene and there will be a report. So, there's this different way of juggling the fiction, of advancing the fiction.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so
do you always have to roll investigate? And that
was my next question. Would you need to hide all the clues behind rolls? So
no. I do feel like most of the investigative scenarios, you won't be rolling only investigate, and you'll be negotiating a lot more than rolling. What I, as a GM, will do is to present the threat of being discovered. For this scenario, I could do this, present the threat of being discovered, and we don't roll investigate because I consider that a success. And I would just ask to act under pressure. So at one point, I'll narrate that the janitor will be stopping by the room, the apartment, and will try to listen in because he picked up a sound. And you roll to hide, So there's different ways you can handle that. But the other bit of the investigate move, just before we move on to the other moves, is once you have all the direct leads, you ask the questions. So I find some strong leads that point towards David, but I don't know where to find David, and I kind of want to know where to find David. So I ask, how can I find out more? And the GM, or you listening to this, will say, yeah, you remember seeing a guy like this back in the Enigma Cafe. You might, stop by and see if he pops up, or maybe ask questions to the bartenders, the baristas, and stuff like that. And what is my gut feel? So looking at this, looking at the crime scene, finding out it's David, what do I feel about it? And that's where the GM, that's one of the occasional moments where the GM takes control of the character and describes what the character feels. So I might say that the David seems like a terrible person. This crime scene has much more blood than the average crime scene. It feels like he relishes in the crime. And this announces a future problem. So encountering David, it might just be that he is a dangerous man. He might be willing to fight. And I'm not describing as a GM that this is a GM move, that I'll be announcing a future problem. But it implies it, so this is just a throwback to the beginning of the conversation, that you don't have to know GM moves by heart, because you'll do when you do them anyways. But anyways.
Yeah.
And the other question is, and it often gets mixed up with the gut feel, is there anything weird? And anything weird can be anything that feels off, but it doesn't generate a feeling on the character. It comes with no judgment of value, of character, of emotion. It's weird. Oh, it is weird that there's no signs of conflict. It seems that the victim was paralyzed and David just slashed through and blood splattered all over. That seems weird. With this much blood, it feels like there should be something broken, like a centerpiece, a table, the television should be broken. There should be more blood elsewhere. So it's weird about what's weird about the situation itself. And you could use the weirdness of it to highlight other stuff. So highlight supernatural things, or bring attention to something that isn't connecting, but the player hasn't realized. Just do help the player a bit, because we're playing detectives, but we are not detectives. And most of the time things are obvious. But
I think the implementation of the investigate move is highly dependent on what you're trying to do in your story and what you're trying to get out of your players. Because a lot of times when I use this move, I'm basically going to tell I'm using it as a falling forward situation. I'm going to tell the players information no matter what. Implementing the move just means that I am introducing possible complications, possible things that are going to get in their way to get to that information. Even if they fail. Failure, still getting information.
One way to see failure is reading the moves like, can I do this that I want to do safely? And a failure just means no.
Yeah.
But you can do that, but you can get information, but you're just not going to do it safely. So maybe as you rummage through the broom, you will realize that you're just in too deep now. That it's clear that someone is investigating and there's no way out. You're just in this. And you might lose stability, but you might get information anyways. And following from that, because I think that's an important thing to explain, the average cult move has two different kind of setups. And the first setup is that you do a softer GM move in the success with a complication. And the other setup is that the player just gets like lower effect. And continuing the investigation scenario, other ways to investigate are read a person, that is tied to the intuition attribute, and observe a situation, that is tied to the perception attribute. And they are set up in a way that you have only the questions that are described in the move, so you don't see anything beyond that, which is different from investigate. And you have to ask them as you are in the scene, but rolling a 10 to 14, so a success with a complication, just means you get one less question. Doesn't necessarily mean you get put in danger. It could be, because everything you do as a GM is a GM move, so you could add some danger to this. Maybe it takes longer to realize a certain truth, or maybe realizing something shocks you, or comes with a second unrelated to the move realization. And to get again the David is dangerous, it could be that I, as a GM, will announce a future problem and straight up say, well, you see that the victim, the witness, is telling you the truth. And since you rolled a 10, 14, I'll give you an extra. You're just in too deep. And David is super dangerous. So you either will solve this, or you kind of will suffer.
Or David will solve
somehow.
it for you.
Yeah. But the main difference here is that in Investigate, you get to zoom out and work, pull the strings and roll with time. So you cover an entire week, month, year, decade of investigative work. It might be that you get to do a typical detective scene where the detective spreads out the Polaroids with the crime scene pictures, or gets to read over and over a statement made by the witness like 10 or so years ago. Or it might be something like, you can get your hands dirty right here, right now. Anyways, but read a person and observe a situation is something you do necessarily right now. And read a person is, the trigger is when you read a person. and
so there must be a person in the room that you can read, right?
Yeah, you have to be either... I think, if I remember correctly, you have to be interacting with them. But my GMing style, I let someone else interact with the person, or you shadow someone and see how they, do stuff and read them. But the idea is you are in the moment, you have the subject of the move, and you roll. And for observe a situation, and then there's a lot of other questions that the player might ask, you have to be typically in a dangerous, sort of like treacherous ground thing. You can roll it as you, for example, let's say the janitor invades the room, you fail to hide, and you're in the crime scene, and the janitor will snap a picture and, report you to the police or whatever. And you might observe a situation, and in the questions, you get something you needed. So what is being hidden from me? And you get it like last minute. You find the negative that you're looking for with David's face right there, for example. But it's different ways to do things. Observe a situation is more of a setup kind of move.
Yeah.
So you set yourself up for action and all of the questions guide the player towards that. So what is my best way through this requires you to have a threat in the scene, an active threat. So I need to hide from the janitor. If he's already in, I didn't stay quiet. So what can I do? What currently poses the biggest threat, and for this question to be asked, you should have more than a single threat. It could be that the janitor gets in, but David is a extra dimensional creature and also got in, so you have two threats, let's say. What can I use to my advantage also requires you to have a threat. And if you don't have a threat, there is what should I be on the lookout for that you can use to establish a future problem, which is a GM move. What is being hidden from me and what seems strange about this are confused, but they follow the same vein of gut feel and anything weird from investigate. But what is being hidden is you as a GM have something that the player doesn't have another way to find other than maybe rolling for or whatever, or you want to introduce something else. And what seems strange could be that you tell the player something's hidden, or it could be that the janitor refuses to enter the room because they see something else. Maybe they look inside and, oh, okay, this is not for me, and bounce. So these establish the threat.
Okay.
But this is the different setup between player moves.
So, because
Implementation.
regarding exactly the investigate role, let's say the two, Gabe and Crystal, are just coming from a crime scene in the alleyway. They know where the victim was living. They run up in the apartment, and now they are looking for any clues who might have been the last person to see the victim, right? So that's where you said there are various options. We can either go into the detailed version of the investigate and ask the players exactly like, okay, you go through everything in the room, you kind of search for any detail that the victim or the perpetrator, the murderer might have left there. What are you willing to do in a sense of how much do you want to kind of give in to find this? And then you get the information that is found. The alternative would be kind of the larger aspect of it, or the zoomed out version of it, looking into, you find the information, but it will take you time to kind of figure out the connections between the murderer and the victim. You might not directly understand what is an important clue, what isn't, but like when you take time, you go through it, you will have the information. And at that point, it's also interesting to kind of introduce conflicts or complications, in a sense that, yes, maybe running up the alleyway, not only the janitor saw you, but some of the neighbors start to kind of look around because they heard gunshots before. Police might be coming into the building, giving you a time threat as well. So how much are you willing then to do? If somebody of the neighbors might be coming into the room, you could say, well, he's going to tell you information about, yeah, he just saw him a couple minutes ago, he was by himself. Well, read a person to kind of understand in that conversation, does he actually tell the truth? Can you glean information instead of looking for clues? Maybe you can find the information necessary to kind of bring you to the next scene by using social skills, if your character is more prone to this or more equipped for this. And then the last option would be simply when there is, let's say, the neighbor is in the room, the janitor comes up, or the landlord comes up, the police is behind him, and now you are in the victim's apartment, the lock is broken, you already touched a few things, and the neighbor saw you taking something. You roll for observe a situation in order to kind of figure out, what can I do now to kind of maybe get away, but like with consequences? What is my best way kind of to deal with this situation? Would that be a fair summary of how to maybe use investigate? Or use the idea of investigation?
And the other roles, yeah.
And the other roles. I mean, I guess the concept of investigation, because it is not a skill-based system where you can have a skill in investigation where you kind of roll for it until you find something. It's more about, setting up the scene, the consequences, the reaction to finding the clues. And I think we also said that it should be that GM's kind of decision, like if the players add elements to the scene when they kind of stumble up into the victim's apartment, or they slam the door shut instead of like quietly closing it, they create more threats. So like you're basically given more information, and you can decide if you want to give them maybe some clues already, but like have them deal with the consequences, rather than to have like a situation where there's a 5-hour shootout or standoff between them and the police in order to kind of find the clues and leave the building. But like it, before the story railroads into something that you didn't foresee, because ultimately it's still trying to progress in the story for the storytelling, it might be wise to give them at least something, and maybe they can come back later in the evening, at night, break in again. But don't hide every clue behind a roll, I think is the core point.
Yeah, I would like to take this and bring it back to the basics, because I want to leave it here that I feel like we should have an episode dedicated to investigations and preparing for and running investigations. I have a lot to say about it. But bringing back to the basics, to the GM moves, your job, your role, your GM hat requires you to see the scenes through a lens of pressure, in the sense that how much pressure am I putting on the characters? And one way to put pressure is to establish conflicts and to deliver threats, like credible threats to them. But another way is to keep announcing like future problems. You're pushing the threats away, but it's a pressure. It's being, and your job as a GM is to shove in, like introduce more pressure by turning the valve a little bit, or releasing pressure and resolving those threats and conflicts. But ideally, you want to have disclosure, and you want to have threats and conflicts. And now, truly back to the basics, GM moves, and I'll continue the investigation examples, but bear with me. GM moves are best seen as a scale that goes from softer to harder GM moves. And if you read through the moves and read through like the realm specific GM moves, so Inferno, Metropolis, it will say either the GM makes a move, the GM makes a soft or hard move, or the GM does a softer or harder move. But the idea is the same. So what is a soft move? A soft move is something preventable. The players could roll to avoid the conflict, or to resolve, or to resist. And a harder move introduces a hard fact, a hard truth to the story. So let's say the janitor is insane and he has a gun, and Crystal is investigating the crime scene and is sure that something pointing towards David will be found there, but the janitor is possessed by David, for example. And the janitor gets the gun and shoots Crystal. as a softer move, I would ask, what do you do? And Crystal might say that she dodges, she ducks behind cover, or whatever. And this could trigger avoid harm, the passive move tied to reflexes. Or not. Or if we see it through another lens, it could be I'm announcing a threat. He shoots, you dodge, you don't roll anything, now you're hidden behind cover. What do you do? So that's even a softer move, because not even a roll was required. But if I say he shoots you and you take 3 harm, you immediately, as described in the rules, have to roll to endure injury. So I don't offer you the chance to dodge. You just take the bullet. And we follow the move, we follow the injury move. So if you roll a 15 plus, it might be that you take the shot and it goes like past you, hurts you a little, or you take it to a heroic shot to the shoulder, typical of action movies, and continue acting. Or it might be that you roll super badly and you choose to die if you roll a -9. It's not an option. And that is a harder move. But a truly hard move here would be the janitor shoots you, take up serious wound, gut shot, shoulder shot, and now you're bleeding. So that's the ultimate. This is a hard stop to the conversation here. This is the final deliver. I've said twice that the janitor is coming in. You've done nothing, so he just got in and shoots you. That's a harder move. One of the hardest you can do, really. Delivering a serious wound or taking away stability. And I say this because you should, and again, you don't have to have a scale in front of you that you go there and, this is getting super dense, but this now is super light, and I should go more like this. But you should have this understanding in you as a GM, and I promise it gets easier as you GM, that there's a lot of pressure in the character, and you should be bumping up the pressure, but you should be resolving. So if the janitor shows up and he shoots Crystal and she rolls avoid harm and succeeds and is now behind cover, this pressure has obviously went down. It is kind of solved because I will have to ask Crystal, what do you do? And if she has a gun and is behind cover and wants to shoot back, that might be an engage in combat, or might not. And now going back to the investigation bit, I think it's super important to realize the pressure in the investigation as a whole thing, understand the stakes of failing to find David, of failing to find something in the crime scene, but it shouldn't stop you from moving the story forward. And when people say powered by the apocalypse games often will require you to fail forward, is that you give the players at least something to continue investigating. Even if right now the pressure just went up by a ton, but you do have to resolve it at some point. But Crystal is, cannot find anything. She's gonna have to run to the fire escape and leave. Pressure is still high. If she just bounces, darts to the room and to the fire escape and flees the room and vanishes into the night, I might announce a future problem and say, you can't come back to this place. You have to find somewhere else to go get the clues. But it's also my job as a GM to tell her where she could go. So this is blocked for you, but someone that might have seen something, maybe the apartment at the other side of the street. And this is just you dialing up or down the pressure a bit, but resolving conflicts and threats.
I think, yeah, I think
Does this make sense?
Yeah.
it does make sense. It does make sense. I also wanted to sort of tie it into the idea of immersion when you are using the player moves, because I feel like people can fall into a pattern of, especially with the moves like read a person, observe a situation. It is reading off the questions and giving the answers instead of setting up an immersion and setting up a scene where, okay, you read a person and you want to know if they're lying. Well, you could just say, yes, they're lying, but there's no immersion in that. You could say, well, they avoid eye contact with you. They're sort of looking at their feet. They said something that is a lie, so maybe the rest of what they said is a lie as well.
Yes, that's another GM principle. Make your moves, but describe them in the fiction, and make your moves, but use the fiction to disguise why.
Yeah,
It's
and I
super
think
important.
right, and I think that leads in that ties into the softer and harder moves as well, because these aren't moves that I think we got somebody saying like, oh, how do I randomize the moves, or how do I kind of gamify the moves? And that's not really what they're there for. They're there as ideas, and you as the GM are implementing those moves into the situations and the scenes for your characters, and immersing your characters into these situations. So you take the generic move and make it something for your players to actually interact with and deal with.
Someone asking about randomizing GM moves might be looking into some guidance to solo roleplay, which is an option. But even then, maybe a solo guide would have specific oracles that would let you to randomize consequences to different types of moves. And then you could randomize moves. But ideally, you don't want to do that. Mostly because I know we're big into playing to find out. It's a huge component of the Powered by the Apocalypse game design, concepts, ideas. But as a GM, you do have to have a stronger grasp, at least in this pressure dial. And by randomizing moves, you run the risk of losing control of it in a way that isn't entirely beneficial. But you could write them down and set up a table and roll up dice, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
Might not make sense most of the time, but
right.
I do want to. Yeah, no, I agree, and I do want to maybe continue because we have this nice setup with our initial investigation scene, where we covered pretty much a lot of the moves already. But let's say we focus back on Crystal cowering behind a sofa while the janitor shoots at her. Maybe just reloads the magazine. Maybe she dropped her gun earlier, and it's just kind of on the other side of the table, so she might need to expose herself to danger. I think, in my perspective, that would be a moment where I would ask for an act under pressure. Does she even have the tenacity to kind of jump forward, grab the gun, turn around, and shoot, or is she so paralyzed from the action? What about act under pressure, Gabe or Crystal? How do you utilize this, and maybe what is worth mentioning? I mean, it is very intuitive, I think, but just to also cover that one.
I have a lot to say. So I'll let Crystal begin and riff off from that.
I think the hardest thing with Act Under Pressure is that it can be overused. It is a easily overused skill just because it can encompass so many things. So I think the maybe the more useful advice about it is how to get creative and not just ask for an act under pressure all the time. But we do have to talk about the player move anyway and how we use it. But I think this situation and where I'm, I'm behind cover, but I need to get my gun in order to fight back. Am I able to fight back? That could be a good call for act under pressure if I can even do it. If I even want to do that. So I think if the player gives an indication that like they do want to fight back or they do want to do something that's incredibly risky, that usually when I talk to my players about something that they want to do, especially if it's to another person, I ask, is your intention to hurt this person or is this intention to scare them or to
negotiate?
Yeah, exactly. This is the negotiation. Like, what is your intention behind getting your gun and shooting at them or, going after this person?
Which would, for example, be the alternative of influence others. But let's stick...
or that. Right. So you can get creative.
Sorry. I'll follow the topics we have written. And I will go back to the GM basics to answer this, which is when to ask for a roll, when a move is triggered, and if you should or not have the player roll for it. And the answer to this is always try to visualize the amount of pressure that is in the player, in the character. And you're looking mostly not to overextend yourself in a single conflict, generally in any game, I think, but we're talking Kult. So you're looking to solve things within a scene or two, and you might break down this as, okay, so Crystal behind the cover is another scene, but we begin at the very high pressure. Anyways, and you have to know and you have to accept that when you ask for a roll to be done, when what the player does triggers a move, you run the risk of creating more pressure. So if you have a super high pressure and Crystal said, and I ask you, Crystal, what do you do? And you say something that triggers a move. So you say you're gonna shoot. Do I want the possibility of you failing to come into play here? And this is a quick judgment call that you as a GM have to do all the time. But it gets easier the more you do it. But you have to know this. And let's say you do. Let's say that, it's not feeling like super thrilling yet. The pressure and the stakes are super high, but the pressure doesn't feel up there. Maybe this is an action-heavy game, like high-octane, occult, crime, thriller, whatever. And shootouts are common and expected, like typical 90s edgy, cold thing. And you want more pressure. So what can you ask the player to roll? And from a single, I get my gun and shoot, you can ask for any move depending on the intent of the player. So if the janitor is ready to shoot, back, you could ask for an avoid harm if Crystal just wants to, deal some suppressive fire. Or you could ask for a act under pressure. Can she, get the gun and unjam or unlock or whatever the gun and shoot back? Does Crystal want to intimidate the janitor? But maybe she thinks that by dealing back some fire, the janitor will be scared. So you have, beyond the action, beyond what Crystal does, which is get the gun and shoot, you should know the intent. And if you don't know, you're the GM, you can ask. So let's say, like, super common thing to happen is suppressive fire to scare away the janitor and get him to back off and leave. Is this an engaging combat? Could be, probably not. Is this a avoid harm? Well, could be, probably not. She's not looking to, headshot him, drop him dead. She just wants to, maybe if she gets one shot right, that's a good thing, but it's mostly about scaring the janitor away. And we enter now is this influence other?
Yeah.
If, let's say, I as a GM don't want to risk right now, she just wants to scare the janitor away, and I'll concede. I'll say, you shoot. You shoot twice, he shoots back once, but then it all goes quiet. But you don't have to look. You just know he's behind the cover. You haven't heard him running away. So he's waiting for an opportunity to shoot back. And you have this moment to chat. Because I know she's probably trying to set up an influence other thing. But, and here's the catch. Influence other, the trigger is when you influence an NPC through negotiation, an argument, or from a position of power, you roll plus charisma. And I ask my fellow GMs here, is Crystal saying, move away, get back off, freeze, whatever? Does it feel charismatic? Does it?
She does it in a very cool accent.
Yeah, sure. I am very cool when I say it. So
it doesn't feel like a negotiation or argument.
No, neither.
Certainly not a position of power.
No.
So would you as a GM ask her to influence other?
Well, I think that depends on the janitor's intentions, right? You as the GM should know the intentions of your NPCs and the intentions going on in the scene. So if you want there to be a de-escalation in this scene where they talk it out, or they me behind with the gun, I can at least say, like, hey, I can say something to get him to vacate the scene, to de-escalate it in some way. Then sure, like, an influence other could be called for. But then you also need to be aware that if I fail at that role, then something needs to happen. Some sort of consequences, whether it be in the scene or, that still happens. They still run away, but do something more awful. But it's the intentions of your NPC, right? Like,
yeah. But here's the thing:
if the
how do you
NPC
know the intent? Can the player get does Crystal have a chance to read a person?
Right. Exactly.
I wouldn't. I don't think there's a chance for reader person in a shootout because, like, again, this happens almost simultaneously. It's a fast-paced scene and action kind of involvement. So, like, I would say influence others if she has like good arguments in a sense of really like I'm gonna show my badge and yell that I'm from the police or something. Well, maybe something like this, or she just presumes another persona to say like, hey, I'm actually cops, like who the fuck are you shooting at? She actually kind of uses an idea of doing this. But I would also say there's from my perspective, the shooting back in a sense that kind of Crystal's reaction here and her shooting back would also depend on her obviously character background and her motivation, because like for me that would be an beautiful and great opportunity to utilize kind of her background, where I would just say like, well, you never shot, or you maybe shot only once before, and you kind of just aim to kind of just ward him off, to kind of get him going. But you shoot him, and you either headshot him, you shoot him in the lungs or gut, and then you hear him collapsing, and now you have to deal with the consequences. You shot a man who just tried to defend himself, or maybe kind of like was curious about you infiltrating a scene, and now you have to deal with what is now happening with this man who's was maybe just a bystander or something. Not even malintent, but like it now has changed from like an action kind of based focus on you kind of dealing with specific action types thing, to like what is it emotionally now doing for you as a character when you realize you probably just killed a guy and you hear maybe his children screaming in the hallway. That is for me kind of a thing where I would kind of go into, but then again that also requires a lot of information about the character background.
That is a great thing for me to build on. So here's the thing. As I try to get from Crystal what she's trying to do, I try to visualize the pressure thing. Not visualize, but feel in me, because it's more of a feeling. We want, and that's the established thing from the beginning, we want to amp up the pressure, because this is a high action supernatural thing. So I know that her scaring him away right now would maybe dilute the pressure, would turn it down a bunch more. And I want to set things up in a way that, and this is GM fiat, you as a GM have the power to do this. So I want to set up things in a way that will raise the pressure and present her options, because it feels like she's locked in this either shoot or scream, or there's just one thing going on, and I want the conflict to extend. So what I'll say is, it goes quiet. You have some options here. One of them is maybe you try to influence them, since that's what you want. But I do think that you have the time to observe a situation here. Like in this brief, like fraction of a second. Let's say Crystal is a detective, typical detective thing. So you're used to the high adrenaline shootout thing. You've had this before, and you will have it again. And you're supposed to be this hard-boiled, like, dude, girl, whatever. And I offered the opportunity without a price, which is a GM move, for her to observe a situation. And she rolls. This is one thing that could happen. And from the questions, I can establish other stuff. I could also maybe let her read a person. If she frames it, and I'll ask her how she's gonna observe a situation. But I can ask her, It can also be a reader person, since your intuition is higher than your perception. You're better at, but you have to do something. So this is not an opportunity without price. This is now with a price, because you have, at the very least, peek, from behind cover and try to make piece things together. So these are options. And since the idea is to build pressure, I can ask her, okay, are you in any way afraid of what might happen if you peek? And she's hard-boiled detective noir thing, like typical tropish, and she might say no, and it's okay. But if she says yes, I, as a GM, can ask, do you feel like this is a keep it together moment? Mustering the courage to see at the risk of getting shot. And, fully aware that a failure might amp up the pressure. Because if she fails, I might say that she freezes. She looks, but the man is already, bah! And it's about luck, she couldn't know that the man was pointing at her cover, waiting for her to peek, but just happens, and she freezes. She doesn't handle the situation very well. So ways to snowball moves, and both observe a situation and read a person, allow me to make a harder GM move. So I might establish something about the setting that makes it more difficult to navigate the area. So you observe a situation, you can't make up things, it's just too chaotic, this is a crime scene, there's police tapes everywhere, you cannot really run into places, there's no way you can make this up right now. And for read a person, it says that you reveal your intentions to the NPC, and the intention here from the start is she wants to scare him away, or it might have been that she wants to flee. And I, as the GM, I know the agenda, and if the NPC realizes, oh, she just wants to flee, okay, then go. Then I just remove the character from the scene and let Crystal do her thing. Maybe, okay, I might offer the opportunity to say, okay, he knows your intentions, and he shouts, okay, you can move, get out, or whatever, and let you leave without another shootout. And this is me just bumping down the pressure and resolving the conflict. That's the gist. That's the GM economics of moves and what to. So you really have to understand. The players don't have to know about all of this. Really, they know that they have attributes and they sometimes roll for stuff, but it's you, the GM, that has the final say on whether or not a move will be triggered. So even if Crystal observes a situation, like she stops and looks around, it might be, maybe you shouldn't ask for a roll if you don't want to handle a failure. If you don't want the failure to bump up the pressure, you can just concede. But then I pledge here to do an entire series on combat. But if you want to read more about combat, there's a Kult drop thing that GM advised to, which I ramble about it. And if you want to know about investigations, I have written a little in the appendix of Black Skies Over Brixton, and I'll link David to things to leave in the description of the video. But I think that's it.
instead of just pushing now the last two player moves into this rather long video already, we decided to kind of make it a separate thing, focusing fully on these two moves with addition to lore and also kind of a deeper understanding about what and when to use these moves. And you'll find that in our next video. So thank you for watching and see you then.